when my sister leaned across the marble kitchen island and asked, "Enjoying your $500,000 trust fund?" I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, the kind that slips out when your brain can't quite compute the words it just heard. "Wait," I said, blinking at her across the glossy surface. "What trust fund?" She froze mid-sip of her oat milk latte, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Then she smiled, slow, deliberate, like a cat playing with its food. "Oh, come on, Lily, don't play dumb. Mom and Dad set it up for you when you turned 18, right? $500,000, you must have burned through it already." The air in that kitchen went cold. $500,000, my parents? No, that couldn't be true. My parents barely helped with my rent last year when I was juggling two part-time jobs and crying into ramen cups. But I could tell from her tone that believed it, or wanted me to believe she did. And in that moment, I felt something inside me splinter. Because if what she said was true, then my entire childhood, the years I'd spent thinking was the golden one, and I was the afterthought, had just been flipped inside out. Growing up, our family looked perfect from the outside. Dad was a corporate lawyer with salt and pepper hair and a voice that could quiet a room. Mom ran a home boutique and never left the house without perfume that smelled like gardenias. We lived in a two-story brick house on a tree-lined street that people described as storybook. And then there was the golden child, brilliant, popular, the kind of girl teachers adored and boys. Every Christmas she got exactly what she wanted: designer purses, a new phone, a trip to Paris. And me. I was the one who got the practical gifts: books, sweaters, one year a used laptop for school. But I didn't complain, not out loud, because Mom always said, "Older, she's setting an example." I guess the example was that if you were perfect enough, love looked easy. Even as kids, I noticed the difference. When got a B on a math test, Dad sighed but said, "You'll do better next time." When I got an A-, he asked, "What happened to the plus?" When stayed out past curfew, Mom said, "She's responsible, I trust her." When I was 10 minutes late, I got grounded for a week. Small things, but they add up, like tiny cuts that bleed just enough to hurt but not enough for anyone else to see. I learned early to keep my voice small, to say it's fine when it was. But that morning in the kitchen, when said trust fund, something inside me cracked wide open. I said, my voice low, careful, "I have no idea what you're talking about." She tilted her head. "Don't mess with me. Mom told me about it years ago. She said they wanted to make things equal." Equal, the word stabbed. Equal wasn't something our family did. Equal was I'd stopped believing in a long time ago. "Why would she tell you and not me?" I asked. Shrugged, standing up, her silk robe swishing around her legs. "Maybe because you can't handle money, maybe because you were always sensitive." Sensitive, another knife. Then she smirked. "Anyway, if you spend it all, no judgment. $500,000 disappears fast when you don't know what you're doing." She turned and walked out, leaving her empty latte cup behind, lipstick stained and perfect, like a crime scene clue. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she said. Trust fund, $500,000 equal. Was she lying? Had always loved twisting the knife, but there was something about the way she said it, too casual, too confident, that felt real. The next morning, I called Mom. "Hey, sweetie," she answered, voice syrupy as always. "How's my baby girl?" "I'm fine," I said automatically. I just saw yesterday she said something weird." Pause. "Oh." "She said you and Dad set up a trust fund for me when I turned 18. The silence on the other end was immediate and deafening. Then Mom laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh, too forced, too quick. "Oh, honey, must have been joking, you know how she is." "No," she sounded serious. "Well, she's always trying to push your buttons," Mom said, her voice tightening. "Don't take it personally." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. "Mom," I pressed, "is there a trust fund?" She exhaled sharply. "Lily, we're not doing this. I have to go, love you." And she hung up. That was when I knew something was off. Because when my mom wanted to hide something, she did exactly that, changed the subject, then vanished. I spent the next 2 days digging through old files, dusty drawers, and emails I hadn't looked at in years. Nothing. But then, on the third night, I found it. A manila envelope buried inside a shoebox labeled Tax 2009. Inside, a single page titled Grace Dawson Trust Agreement. My breath caught. It was dated the year I turned 18, signed by my parents, stamped by a notary. $500,000. Held in trust until age 25. I was 26. The trust should have been mine a year ago. So where was it? I stared at that document for what felt like forever, my hands shaking. You ever have one of those moments where the world tilts, and suddenly everything you thought you knew about your life rearranges itself? That was me, sitting on the floor at midnight, surrounded by piles of yellowed paper, realizing my family had hidden a fortune from me. And the worst part, they'd done it together. Mom, Dad, and all in on it. The perfect Dawson family, all smiles and Christmas cards, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, it hadn't been fine for years. And now I had proof. The next morning I drove back to my parents' house, my old house. The driveway looked the same, manicured hedges, the same blue front door, but stepping inside felt like trespassing. Mom was in the living room arranging flowers. Dad sat behind the newspaper. They looked up, startled, as I walked in holding the envelope. "Where is it?" I asked. Mom blinked. "Where is what, honey?" "The trust fund." I dropped the paper onto the coffee table. "Don't act like you don't know." Her face went pale. Dad lowered his paper slowly, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "You made it," I said. "You and Mom, for me, $500,000. Mom pressed a hand to her chest. "Lily, please." "No, don't please me, Mom. You lied. You've been lying for years." Appeared at the top of the stairs, hair perfectly curled, holding her phone like she'd been recording. "Oh, so you did find it," she said, "finally." I spun around. "What do you mean, finally?" She smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take you." My pulse thundered in my ears. Dad said sharply, but she ignored him. "What can I say, sis?" she continued. "You were always a little slow when it came to family business." Family business. Those two words would haunt me later, when I learned what they really meant. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. And secrets. And the truth about who I really was. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that something big, something ugly, was buried beneath the surface of our perfect family. And I was finally about to dig it up. You won't believe what I found next. If you've ever had a memory that looked golden until you tilted it and realized it was rusting underneath, that's what my childhood felt like after that day. When I stormed out of my parents' house, clutching that trust document, I thought I was holding proof of betrayal. But I didn't realize it was also a key, one that would unlock a door I didn't even know existed. Because when I looked back, really looked back, the signs had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. And I were born 3 years apart. She was the miracle baby, Mom's first pregnancy after years of trying. I was the surprise. That's what they called me, not accident exactly, but close enough that it hurt. When I was little, I thought surprise meant special. But as I grew older, I realized it meant extra. Unplanned. What? Unwanted. I remember one summer afternoon when I was 10 and was 13. Dad had taken us to the yacht club, one of those fancy places with a pool that smelled like chlorine and sunscreen and quiet money. Had just joined the junior sailing team, and everyone made a big deal about it. Dad spent the whole afternoon teaching her to tie knots, his hand over hers, his voice proud and patient. When I asked if I could try, he said without even looking at me, "You're too young for that, Lily. Watch and learn." So I sat on the dock, swinging my legs, pretending not to care. But I remember watching the sunlight glint off the water and thinking, maybe if I stay quiet enough, he'll see me too. He didn't. Mom wasn't cruel, not outright. She was the kind of woman who killed with kindness. If cried, Mom hugged her. If I cried, Mom sighed. "Don't be dramatic, Lily," she'd say, brushing my tears away like dust. "Your sisters had a long day." It became a pattern. His feelings were weather. Mine were noise. When I was 16, I got accepted into a state art program, one of those summer intensives where you learn from real painters and sculptors. It was a big deal for me. I'd spent months saving for the supplies list: charcoal, brushes, oil paints. But a week before it started, Mom sat me down at the kitchen table. "Sweetheart," she began, smoothing her skirt, "we can't afford the program this year." I felt my stomach drop, but I've been saving. "I know, honey, but's car needs new tires. She drives you to school, remember? It's important." I stared at her, not sure if I'd heard right. She was taking my art money for car. Mom reached across the table, patting my hand like a doctor breaking bad news. "Next summer, okay? You're still young." That was the first time I realized that in our family, love was a transaction. Fast forward 10 years and not much had changed. Was still shining, still the center of every family photo. She'd gone to a private university. I'd gone to community college, working nights at a diner to afford it. When I graduated, my parents gave her a BMW for sticking with her degree. They gave me a framed Bible verse that said, "Good things come to those who wait." I used to think maybe they were saving something special for me, that I just had to earn it. Now I knew what they'd really been saving. A secret. The more I thought about that trust fund, the more the puzzle pieces rearranged themselves. Like the year I turned 18. Mom and Dad threw me a birthday dinner, just family quiet at home. No gifts except a card. Inside the card was a folded check for $1,000. Just a little help, Mom said, don't spend it all at once. I remember thinking how generous that was. But now, looking back, I realized that was the same month that trust fund had been signed. $500,000, and they handed me 1,000 like it was charity. I needed answers. So I went digging again. This time I started with my grandmother, Mom's mother, who'd been living in a care facility since her stroke. She'd always been the one person in our family who treated me like I mattered. Every birthday, she sent a handwritten card. Every Christmas, a small gift. When I visited her at the home, she'd press my hand and whisper, "You're stronger than they know." I didn't understand what she meant until now. When I walked into her room that afternoon, she looked up from her crossword and smiled faintly. "Lily, my darling," she said, "you look tired." I sat on the edge of her bed. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" She tilted her head. "Of course, dear." "Did Mom and Dad ever tell you about a trust fund for me?" Her pencil froze mid-word. Then she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part sorrow, part guilt. "So," she said softly, "you finally found out." My heart pounded. "So it's true." She nodded slowly. "It was your father's idea, but it wasn't supposed to be like this." "Like what?" She set the pencil down, her hands trembling slightly. "When your father and I sold the old lake house, part of the proceeds went into 2 trusts, one for each of you girls, equal shares." "Wait to..." "Yes, was released when she graduated college. Yours was to be held until you turned 25. "But I'm 26, I said. "I never got it." She looked away. "I know, sweetheart. I asked your mother about it last year. She said you weren't ready, that you were unstable." Unstable. That word hit like a slap. I wanted to scream because they made me unstable. But I just sat there, shaking as Grandma sighed. "I always knew there was something off about the way they treated you," she murmured, "but I didn't think they'd go this far." Her eyes met mine, watery, tired, full of regret. "Lily," she said, "whatever they told you about yourself, don't believe it. You have every right to that money, every right." I left her room numb. $500,000. Hidden. Stolen, maybe. And worse, my parents had convinced everyone else that I couldn't be trusted with it. That was their insurance policy. If I ever found out, no one would believe me. That night I went home and tore through every drawer again, searching for anything that tied back to that trust. Old mail, receipts, bank statements, nothing. Then, as I was about to give up, I noticed something taped to the bottom of a filing cabinet drawer. A single envelope marked in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter. My heart hammered as I unfolded it. "What? If Lily ever asks about the trust, tell her it's gone. She doesn't need that kind of pressure in her life. You know how she gets. We're doing this to protect her and you. One day she'll understand. Love, Mom." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. "Protect me." No, they were protecting themselves. And they'd used to do it. I don't even remember sitting down. I just remember the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. You ever realize that the people you'd die to protect would never do the same for you? That's what it felt like. And the worst part was I still loved them. I hated them, I distrusted them, I wanted to scream at them, but I still loved them. Because that's what family does to you. It twists the knife and then tells you it's for your own good. The next morning I texted, "Me, we need to talk." "About what?" "Me, you know what." "Fine, Mom's having a dinner tomorrow, be there." That was it, no emojis, no warmth, just cold efficiency. I didn't know if she planned to confess or finish burying the secret. Either way, I was done playing quiet. Because whatever they'd done, I was going to find out. But what I discovered next changed everything. I showed up to my parents' house at exactly 6 p.m. the next evening. It was raining, that slow, deliberate kind of rain that feels like the world is trying to warn you. Through the front window, I could already see the glow of the chandelier over the dining table. Everything looked the same as always, polished, perfect, curated. But inside me, something had changed. I wasn't the quiet, compliant daughter tonight. I was the storm at their doorstep. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Lily," she said too brightly, "you made it." She was wearing pearls. She always wore pearls when she was nervous. Behind her, I could hear the faint clink of dishes, his voice laughing too loudly with Dad. "I wouldn't miss it," I said flatly. "Good," she replied, stepping aside. Have a nice evening, okay?" Her voice trembled just slightly on nice. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and expensive candles. Was pouring wine, her red dress crisp and smug. "Look who decided to join the family," she said, raising her glass. "Our little detective." "Cut it out," I snapped. Dad looked up from carving the roast, frowning. "We're not starting this again." I sat down, gripping my fork so tight my knuckles went white. "Starting what, Dad? The truth." Mom cleared her throat. "Lily, we've already told you." "No," I interrupted. "You lied, all of you. You said there was no trust. I found the paperwork, and Grandma confirmed it." That got their attention. Dad's knife paused mid-slice. Mom's smile collapsed, froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. "You talked to Mother," Mom whispered. "Yes," I said, "and I found your letter, too." The silence that followed was so heavy it made the ticking of the grandfather clock sound deafening. "What letter?" Dad asked slowly. I pulled the crumpled paper from my purse and tossed it onto the table. The ink had smudged from where I'd gripped it too hard, but the words were still clear. "If Lily ever asks about the trust, tell her it's gone." Mom stared at it, her face draining of color. Then she said softly, "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me," I laughed bitterly, "by stealing from me." "Watch your tone," Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. "No," I said, shaking. "I've watched my tone my whole life. I've watched everything, what I say, how I act, how much space I take up, because you made it clear I wasn't allowed to be anything but grateful. And now I find out you've been hiding my money." "It's not that simple," Mom said. "Then make it simple," I snapped. "Where is it?" Set her glass down with a clink. "You really want to know?" I turned to her. "Yes." She smiled, that same cruel, amused smile she used to give me when we were kids. "Fine," she said, "the trust still exists, but it's not in your name anymore." My stomach dropped. "What?" Dad's jaw tightened. "No, she deserves to know," said, eyes gleaming. "Dad moved it years ago when you were 19. I felt dizzy. "Moved it where?" "To another account," she said, "one you don't control." I turned to Dad. "Is that true?" He didn't answer. That silence was worse than any confession. "You had no direction," Dad said finally, his tone clipped. "You dropped out of school, you were dating that musician, what was his name? The one who couldn't hold a job. You weren't ready for that kind of responsibility. So you stole it," I said. "I managed it," he corrected, "for your own good." My voice cracked. "For my own good, or?" Mom gasped. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is you pretending this is love." Leaned back, smirking. "You really think $500,000 would fix your life, Lily? You'd have blown it in 6 months. My throat burned. "You don't know that." "Oh, I do," she said, "because I watched you fail at everything you touched." That was the moment something inside me snapped. I stood up so fast my chair screeched across the floor. "You think I failed?" I said, voice shaking. "I worked 2 jobs to keep myself afloat while you two covered up this. You lived off the same money that was meant for me. You took my chance and you called it help." Mom's voice wavered. "Lily, please." "Stop lying," I screamed. The sound echoed off the walls. For a second, no one moved. Then smiled faintly and reached for her phone. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Recording," she said. "You're unstable, remember, just in case you do something crazy." I lunged forward and snatched the phone from her hand. It clattered to the floor, screen cracking. Gasped, "You're insane." "Stop it, both of you," Dad barked. But it was too late. Something inside that perfect family image had finally shattered, and it wasn't going back together. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the chandelier rattled. Rain hit my face like needles as I stumbled down the driveway, shaking with rage. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. But then, halfway to my car, I froze. Through the window, I could see them, the three of them, huddled together. Mom crying, Dad rubbing his temples, smirking, whispering something that made both of them nod. It hit me then, they weren't scared. They were planning. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that look, the silent agreement between them. It wasn't guilt, it was strategy. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because what could they possibly need to plan now? Unless there was more. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank listed on the trust paperwork, an old local branch downtown. The carpet smelled like dust and perfume, and the woman at the counter smiled politely when I asked to see my trust account. Can I have your name, ma'ams? Grace Dawson. She typed for a moment, then frowned. I'm sorry, she said. That account was transferred 8 years ago. To where? I can't disclose that without authorization from the current trustee. Who's the trustee? She hesitated, then glanced around before lowering her voice. It says here the trustee of record is Dawson. My blood ran cold. What? My sister. My enemy. I thanked the teller and walked out in a daze, rain beginning to fall again like the universe itself was mocking me. Had control of the money. Which meant she'd lied to me and maybe to Mom and Dad too. Or maybe they all knew. Either way, that trust fund wasn't just stolen, it was weaponized. That night, I confronted her again, this time at her apartment. She lived in one of those high-rise buildings with a private elevator and a doorman who looked at me like I didn't belong there. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised. I was wondering when you'd show up, she said. Why are you the trustee? I demanded. She smiled faintly, because I earned it. Earned it, I said, stunned, by lying. She crossed her arms. By being responsible. You think Mom and Dad were going to let you handle $500,000 when you couldn't even keep a job at that coffee shop? I lost that job because Dad told my boss I was unstable, I shot back. She didn't even flinch. Maybe he wasn't wrong, she said. I took a step closer. Where is the money now? Her eyes flickered. It's invested. In what? She hesitated just long enough for me to know she was lying. Something you wouldn't understand, she said finally. I stared at her, my sister, the girl I used to share a bunk bed with who once braided my hair before school. How could you do this to me? I whispered. She tilted her head. It's just money, Lily. No, I said, voice shaking. It's my life, it's my freedom, and you stole it. She smiled, then prove it. I left before I could scream. The city lights blurred through my tears as I drove away. His voice echoed in my head, then prove it. And I would. I didn't know how yet. But I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Because deep down, something told me the trust fund was just the beginning. And what I'd find next would change everything. For 2 nights straight, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw smirk, the way she said, then prove it. Those words clawed at my brain until I couldn't tell if I was furious or terrified. Because deep down, I already knew. She wasn't bluffing. Something about the trust fund wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. And I needed to take it back. By day 3, I was running on caffeine and pure vengeance. I started with small steps, calling banks, pulling public records, tracking financial transfers linked to the trust tax ID number. Most refused to tell me anything without trustee authorization. But one manager, a man named at a private investment firm, slipped. He mentioned Dawson Holdings LLC. My heart nearly stopped. I'd never heard that name before. Can you tell me who the managing partner is? I asked. He hesitated. I really shouldn't. Please, I whispered. I just need to know if my sister Dawson is involved. He paused again, then said quietly, yes, Dawson is listed as the majority owner. Majority owner. So she wasn't just holding my money. She'd turned it into a business. I spent the next few hours scouring state business registries. And that's when I found it. Dawson Holdings LLC, registered 2017. Managing partner, Dawson. Initial capital, $500,000. I stared at the screen, numb. That was my trust fund. She used it as seed money to build her own company, without my consent, without even telling me. The betrayal burned so deep it felt physical. But then I noticed something strange. The company wasn't thriving, it was bleeding. Recent filings showed late taxes, lawsuits, outstanding debts. It looked like Dawson Holdings was collapsing. My money, my inheritance, was disappearing into the sinkhole of my sister's ego. That night, I drove back to her apartment. The elevator hummed quietly as it climbed to the 15th floor. I could see my reflection in the chrome doors, pale, trembling, determined. When she opened the door, her smile faltered. "You look awful," she said. "I know what you did," I said. Her expression didn't even flicker. "You'll have to be more specific." "Dawson Holdings," I hissed. "You used my trust to start it." Her jaw tightened. "You've been snooping." "I had to," I said, "because you lied, you told me the trust didn't exist, and you've been using it for years." Crossed her arms, looking almost bored. "It's complicated." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "It's theft." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, it was an investment. I took something that was sitting there doing nothing and turned it into opportunity. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" I shouted. "You destroyed my life." "Destroyed?" she snapped. "Lily, your life was nothing. You were working dead-end jobs, drifting from apartment to apartment. You didn't even know the trust existed until I told you." "Exactly," I cried, "because you wanted it that way." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I took a step closer. "You stole from me, you built your whole empire, your car, your apartment, your lifestyle on my future." Her eyes narrowed. "Empire? Please, you think $500,000 is an empire, you think I haven't had to work to keep it afloat." "So it's true," I said, "it's gone." That hit her. She looked away, "Not all of it." "How much?" She hesitated. 100,000 maybe, the rest, well, things didn't go as planned. I felt my knees weaken. I whispered, "You ruined everything." Her voice softened slightly. "You wouldn't understand, you've never taken risks." I stared at her in disbelief. "You call this a risk? You call destroying your sister's life a risk?" She sighed. "You always make everything so dramatic." Something inside me snapped again. Before I could stop myself, I said, "You're just like Dad." Her head jerked up. "What?" "You think control equals love. You think taking from people is protecting them. You both hide behind this idea that you're smarter, that you know best, but really you're just scared." "Don't psychoanalyze me," she hissed. "Then tell me the truth," I said. "Why did you really take it?" For the first time, her composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, "Because I couldn't stand watching them love you more." I froze. "What?" Her lip trembled. "After Grandma sold the lake house, Mom and Dad promised to give us equal shares, but then they kept saying, 'We'll wait until Lily's ready.' Like I was the problem. So yeah, I took it. I wanted something that was mine for once." Her words hit harder than any slap. "You wanted to punish them," I said quietly, "so you punished me." She shook her head. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "But it is like this," I said. We stood there in silence, two sisters staring at each other across a decade of resentment. Then, out of nowhere, she whispered, "You should go." And that's when I noticed something on the counter, an envelope thick and unsealed. The top line caught my eye. "Notice of foreclosure, Dawson Holdings LLC." I looked at her. "You're being sued." She swallowed hard. "It's temporary." I said, "You're broke." She turned away. "It's none of your business." "It's literally my business," I shouted. "You used my money." But she didn't answer. Instead, she walked into the next room, slamming the door behind her. I left shaking, half in fury, half in disbelief. I'd come for truth. What I got was a confession wrapped in guilt and ruin. But there was one detail hadn't mentioned, something I noticed just before leaving. The foreclosure notice was addressed not just to Dawson Holdings, but to Dawson Family Trust, which meant my parents were still tied to it. They weren't victims. They were accomplices. That night, I sat in my car outside their house, staring at the dark windows. I should have been exhausted, but adrenaline kept me wide awake. Through the windshield, the house looked exactly as it always had, perfect, peaceful, smug. But now I knew the truth. The Dawsons weren't a family. They were a cover story. I went back the next morning, knocking hard until Mom opened the door. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Lily," she whispered, "please, not again." "Save it," I said. I know about Dawson Holdings. I know you let take the money. She paled. Who told you that? I said, and the state registry. She sank onto the couch, trembling. Your father thought it would teach you responsibility, she said weakly. Responsibility, I repeated. You let her launder my future into her ego trip. Tears streamed down her face. You don't understand, your father said. What did he say, Mom? She hesitated. That you weren't really entitled to it. I blinked. What do you mean? She covered her mouth, sobbing. Oh God, he made me promise never to tell you. My heart stopped. Tell me what, I demanded. She shook her head, whispering, You'll hate me. Tell me. She looked up, eyes swollen. Lily, she said, her voice breaking, you're not his biological daughter. The words landed like a thunderclap. Everything around me seemed to blur, the ticking clock, the whir of the ceiling fan, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. What? I whispered. She clasped her hands. I had an affair before you were born. Your father found out years later. He agreed to raise you, but when Mother sold the lake house, he said the money should stay in the bloodline. My stomach turned, so he gave my trust fund to. She nodded weakly. He said it was best for the family. I didn't want to lose him, so I agreed. I felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. 26 years of memories, birthdays, family dinners, Christmas mornings, rewrote themselves in real time. Every time Dad looked at me with quiet disappointment. Every time he called our pride and joy. Every time I wondered why I never quite fit. It all made sense now. I wasn't just the unwanted child. I was the secret. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Don't touch me, I whispered. Lily plays. You all lied to me, I said. Every single one of you. You built your lives on lies and called it protection. Her voice cracked. We did what we had to do. No, I said, standing up. You did what made you comfortable. And then I walked out. I didn't look back. You think you know your family. You think love means safety. But sometimes love is just the prettiest mask for betrayal. And as I drove away from that house for the last time, rain streaking across the windshield, I made a silent promise. If they'd stolen my blood, my name, and my future, I'd take something back. But what I did next almost destroyed me too. You ever have a moment so heavy it changes the way sound moves through the air? That's what it felt like after I left my parents' house. The world went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Funeral quiet. Like everything I thought was solid had turned to dust overnight. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was unanchored. I drove aimlessly for hours that night, the rain blurring the headlights into streaks of white fire. Every breath felt like pulling air through glass. My mother's words kept replaying. You're not his biological daughter. Over and over until they didn't sound like words anymore, just static. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I couldn't go home. Not to my apartment, not to their house. Nowhere felt real. So I drove to the only place that still felt mine. Grandma's nursing home. When I walked in, the night nurse gave me that polite but worried look people reserve for someone who's clearly on the edge. Visiting hours are over, she said softly. I just need 5 minutes, I whispered. Something in my face must convinced her, because she nodded and waved me through. Grandma was awake, reading a romance novel under the glow of her bedside lamp. Lily, she said gently, oh honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. I think I have, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Mine. Her eyes softened. They told you. I froze, you knew. She nodded slowly. I wanted to tell you myself, but your mother begged me not to. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would everyone rather lie to me than just tell me the truth? She reached for my hand. Her skin was paper-thin and warm. Because the truth, she said, breaks things that can't be mended. Well, it's broken now, I said bitterly, so what difference does it make? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your real father's name was Daniel Reeves. He was one of your mother's clients. They were close. When she got pregnant, she didn't know who the father was. Your father, David, agreed to raise you, but he never forgave her. My chest tightened, so that's why he hated me. Grandma's eyes shimmered. He didn't hate you, sweetheart. He hated the reminder, but I swear to you, he still cared in his own broken way. I shook my head. He stole my trust fund, Grandma. That's not caring. She sighed. No, that's fear. We sat in silence. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just my grandmother. She was the only one left who hadn't lied to me. "I'm so sorry, Lily," she whispered. "You deserved better than all of this." Tears finally broke through. I buried my face in her blanket and sobbed, ugly, shaking sobs that tore through me until I could barely breathe. She just held my hand the whole time, her thumb tracing slow, patient circles on my skin. "You have to promise me something," she said finally. "What?" "Don't let their choices become your prison. You can walk away. You can start over." Her voice cracked on that last word, and I knew she was telling me the truth. But the thing about breaking free, it always costs something. And I was about to find out just how much. It happened 2 nights later. I was at my apartment, trying to sleep for the first time in days, when my phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Unknown numbers. "Lily, it's Mom's in the hospital. It's bad. Please come." For a second, I thought it was a trick. But then another message came through. "Heart attack." I was out of bed before I even realized I was moving. The drive felt endless. When I reached the hospital, the fluorescent lights stung my eyes. Was packing the hallway outside the ICU, her mascara streaked and her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept either. "She collapsed," she said the moment she saw me. "Dad found her in the kitchen." "What happened?" "They said stress," murmured, "too much pressure." I almost laughed. Of course. Even now, it was my fault by implication. The nurse came out and asked for immediate family. We both followed her in. Mom lay pale and fragile under a sea of wires, the steady beep of the heart monitor breaking the silence. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard my voice. "Lily," she whispered. I stepped closer, my throat tightening. "Hey, Mom." Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. "I'm sorry." "Don't," I said softly. "Don't waste your breath." But she shook her head. "No, listen," she gasped. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Like what?" "Wasn't supposed to touch it," she whispered, her words labored. "Your father made her trustee, but the money was still yours." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "She forged the transfer forms," Mom said weakly. "She moved it without permission. David didn't know until it was too late." I stared at her, stunned. "Stole it from you too." Mom nodded faintly. "He wanted to fix it, but then she threatened to expose my secret." The heart monitor beeped faster. "Mom, stop talking." "She blackmailed us," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "We didn't know what to do." Then her eyes rolled back, the alarm went off, and nurses rushed in yelling code words I couldn't even process. They pushed us out. The hallway spun around me. Sat down, face blank, staring at the floor. "You heard her," I said, my voice shaking. "You blackmailed them." She looked up slowly. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "You ruined their lives," I screamed. "You ruined mine." She was lying, said, but her voice was too hollow to be convincing. "Don't you dare," I said. "Don't you dare call her a liar when she's in there fighting for her life." I could see her flinch, but she didn't speak. Hours passed before a doctor came out. Mom was stable but unconscious. "Stress-induced cardiac arrest," they said. "Touch and go." Dad arrived shortly after. When he saw me, his face hardened, like seeing me made everything worse. "This is your fault," he said. I blinked. "What?" "You had to dig everything up, you had to come back." "She had a right to know," muttered, but he silenced her with a glare. "No," he said coldly, "you both pushed her too far." That was it. Something inside me, whatever thread was still tethered to that family, finally snapped. "You know what, Dad?" I said, voice trembling. "You can keep your guilt, you can keep your lies, but I'm done carrying them." He turned away. "You always were ungrateful." I laughed bitterly, "And you always mistook silence for obedience." Then I walked out. I sat in the hospital parking lot until sunrise, staring at the empty sky. Every part of me ached, from exhaustion, from rage, from grief. And then, in the harsh morning light, I remembered something Mom had said before collapsing. She forged the transfer forms. If that was true, there was evidence. Proof. And for once in my life, I was going to find it. I went back to his apartment later that day. She wasn't there, probably still at the hospital. Using the spare key I'd found in her car years ago, I let myself in. Her place was spotless as always. Too spotless. The kind of clean that hides things. I started with her desk. Nothing. Then her file cabinet. Locked. But when I opened the kitchen drawer, I found a small silver USB drive taped underneath the countertop. I plugged it into her laptop. There were dozens of files, scanned bank documents, trust papers, digital signatures, and one folder labeled Transfer Lily Account. I clicked it open and froze. There it was, the official authorization form from 2017. My signature, except it wasn't mine. The handwriting was close but not perfect, and next to it the notary stamp read C. Dawson. She'd notarized her own forgery. That's when I heard the door open behind me. Looking for something. Was a voice. I turned slowly. She stood there, her eyes dark, jaw tight. I told you to stay out of my life. You forged my name, I said. You stole everything. She took a step closer. You wouldn't understand what it took to keep that money alive. It's my money, I shouted. You don't even belong to this family, she screamed back. The words hit like a bullet. But before I could react, she lunged for the laptop. We struggled, hands clawing, shoving, shouting. Then there was a sound. A sharp crack. The laptop hit the corner of the table and smashed. Sparks of smoke. I stumbled backward. Screamed, "Look what you did." The fire alarm went off, blaring. I ran. By the time I got outside, my hands were bleeding, my heart racing so hard it hurt. Sirens wailed in the distance. I didn't look back, because I already knew. That wasn't the end. That was just the beginning of the reckoning. And what came next finally exposed everything. The morning after the fire alarm, I sat in my car outside the police station with the broken USB drive in my pocket. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling. I had proof, digital records, forged documents, everything. Enough to ruin S' reputation, maybe even get her arrested. And yet I couldn't make myself open the door. Because turning her in meant burning what was left of my family. And as broken as they were still mine. You think betrayal would make that decision easy. But it doesn't. It just makes everything feel heavier. Inside my chest, guilt and anger were wrestling. One whispering, "You can't do this, she's your sister." The other hissing, "She's not your sister anymore, she made that choice." I sat there for almost an hour, watching the rain slide down the windshield, listening to the world move on like nothing had happened. Finally, I whispered to myself, "No more lies." Then I opened the car door and walked in. The police station smelled like coffee and stale paper. When I handed the officer the USB and told him about the forgery, his eyebrows went up. He asked me to fill out a statement. I did, every word shaking on the page. When I finished, he said, "We'll need to verify the documents. If what you're saying checks out, we'll open an investigation." I nodded. "You'll find everything you need on there." He gave me a sympathetic look. Family cases like this, they're messy. I laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. By the time I left the station, my phone was already blowing up. Text from Dad. "What did you do? You're going to destroy us. Your mother just got out of ICU. She can't handle this. And then, I know you went to the police. You'll regret this." No apology, no denial. Just threats. For a moment, I almost deleted everything, the texts, the proof, all of it. But then I remembered Mom in that hospital bed, gasping for air, saying she blackmailed us. And I realized the only way out of this family's curse was through it. A week later, the police called. They confirmed the forgery. Had notarized the documents herself using a seal. They wanted her in for questioning. When I hung up, I felt something strange, not joy, not victory. Just grief. Because justice, when it finally comes, doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like loss. That night, I visited Mom in the hospital again. She was awake, propped up in bed, pale but lucid. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "I heard," she whispered, "about." I nodded, "They have proof." She looked away, "Your father's furious." "I don't care," I said softly. "I'm done protecting people who hurt me." She took a deep breath. "You always were stronger than we gave you credit for." I wanted to believe that was an apology, but it felt more like a confession. When I left her room, I found Dad waiting in the hallway. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his face gray with exhaustion. "Are you happy now?" he said quietly. "No," I said, "but I'm finally honest." He shook his head. "You don't understand, this family doesn't survive scandal." "It survived lies for 26 years," I said. "Maybe it's time it didn't." For a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not anger but shame. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then stopped. And walked away. 2 days later, was arrested. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of funds. I watched the news clip in disbelief, her perfect face caught in the camera flash, expression blank as they led her into the courthouse. She didn't look evil. She just looked lost. And in a twisted way, I still loved her. Because that's the curse of family, love doesn't vanish, even when it's poisoned. I didn't go to the arraignments. But a week later, I got a letter. No return address. No signature. Just a folded piece of paper with handwriting. "You got what you wanted, I hope you're happy." For what it's worth, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was trying to build something that would prove I wasn't useless. But I guess we're both good at destroying things we love. "Tell Mom I'm sorry, don't tell Dad anything, he'll never forgive me." "Maybe one day you will." I read it 10 times. Then I cried for the first time since she'd been arrested. 3 weeks later, Mom was discharged from the hospital. She moved in with me for a while, the first time in my life we'd ever lived together without Dad's shadow between us. She was fragile, quieter than before. But sometimes, late at night, we'd talk. One night she said, "You know, I never set out to hurt you." "I know," I said softly, "but you did." She nodded, and I'll live with that. Then she looked at me, eyes glossy. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it. "No," I said finally, "I just don't trust you." She nodded again, like she understood that was the best I could give. A month later, the trust was finally transferred back into my name. Not the full amount, what was left after the lawsuits and debt repayments. But it was mine. $112,480.23. I stared at the number on the screen, feeling nothing. I'd spent my whole life thinking that money was the key to freedom. But standing there, it just felt like blood money. A number attached to every lie my family ever told. I didn't touch it for weeks. Then one morning, I drove to the nursing home to see Grandma. She smiled when she saw me. "You look lighter," she said. "I guess I am," I said, "the truth's out." She nodded slowly. "And what will you do with it?" I hesitated. I was thinking of starting something, a scholarship, for girls like me, the ones who get overlooked. Her eyes filled with pride. "That's a beautiful idea, Lily. Maybe I can turn all this pain into something good." She smiled faintly. "That's what healing looks like." But healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. Sometimes I still wake up angry. Sometimes I still replays voice in my head whispering, "You'll regret this." And sometimes I miss the version of her who used to sneak cookies into my room when I was grounded. But then I remember the other version, the one who stole from me, gaslit me, and weaponized my own bloodline against me. That version, I buried her. A few months later, I went to visit in jail. She looked thinner, older, her confidence stripped away. When she saw me, she didn't smile. Just stared. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I needed to see you," I said, "to tell you I forgive you." Her eyebrows lifted. "You what?" "I forgive you," I repeated. "Not for you, for me. I can't move on if I keep hatting you." Her eyes shimmered, but her voice stayed sharp. "You think that makes you better than me?" "No," I said, "it makes me free." She leaned back, studying me. "You really are Mom's daughter." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll never make her mistakes." Then I stood up to leave. As I reached the door, she called after me. "Lily." I turned. "I really did love you," she said softly. "I just didn't know how." I nodded. "I know." And I meant it. When I walked out into the sunlight, it was the first time in years that the air didn't feel heavy. The sky was clear. The world was quiet again, but this time not in a funeral way. In a healing way. In the end, I didn't just lose a sister. I lost an illusion. The illusion of a perfect family. The illusion of love without accountability. And sometimes, losing an illusion is the only way to find the truth. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more person I needed to face, and one final decision that would define everything that came next. It took me months to gather the courage to face my father again. By then had already been sentenced, probation and community service instead of prison, thanks to Mom's plea to the judge. The news had faded from local gossip, the whispers dying down. But inside me, the noise never stopped. Because there was still one ghost left in the story. My father. It was early autumn when I finally went back to the old house. The air smelled like rain and cut grass, and the oak tree in the front yard had already started shedding its leaves, golden pieces of memory falling at my feet. I rang the bell once. No answer. Then the door creaked open. Dad stood there in his cardigan, his face thinner, older, the weight of everything written in the deep lines around his eyes. Lily, he said softly. Just my name, but it felt like a test. Can I come in? I asked. He stepped aside wordlessly. The house smelled exactly the same, lemon polish and something faintly floral. But the silence was heavier than ever. He gestured to the living room. Sit. I did, perching on the edge of the same couch where I'd once begged for truth and been given lies instead. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked, steady and cruel. Finally, I said, I wanted to hear it from you. He looked up, his eyes weary. Hear what? The truth, I said, about Mom, about me, about everything. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You already know the truth. No, I said, I know her version, I want yours. He sat back, staring into the distance like he was watching old film reels play behind his eyes. When your mother told me she was pregnant, he began, I already knew. The timing didn't fit, but I loved her and I wanted a family. He looked down at his hands. When you were born, I told myself it didn't matter, that love could rewrite blood. I felt my throat tighten. But love, he said quietly, isn't enough when you're living a lie. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in years. I tried, Lily, I tried to see you as mine, but every time I looked at you, I saw him. Daniel, I said. He nodded. Your mother begged me to keep it quiet. I agreed because I thought I could forgive her, but I never forgave myself for not leaving. I swallowed hard, so you punished me instead. He closed his eyes. I didn't mean to, I thought I was protecting what little I had left. By stealing from me, I said bitterly. I didn't steal, he said firmly. I set the terms, I made sure would manage it, but I never told her to take it. So she betrayed you too. He nodded slowly, like mother, like daughter, I suppose. The words hung between us, heavy with something that wasn't quite blame, more like resignation. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then quietly I asked, do you hate me? He looked startled, no. You sure? He hesitated. I hated what you represented, the failure, the reminder that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was, but you. His voice cracked, you were innocent, you always were. Tears stung my eyes, unexpected and unwanted. I'd waited my whole life for him to say something like that, and now that he had, it just hurt. I needed a father, I whispered. He looked away, and I wasn't one. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. Then I stood up. I'm not here for an apology, I said. I just needed you to know I see you now, all of you, the good, the bad, the cowardly. He nodded, and what do you see? A man who tried, I said, but not enough. He flinched but didn't argue. As I walked toward the door, he said softly, Lily. I turned. For what it's worth, he said, I'm proud of what you did, you told the truth, something I never had the courage to do. And then, for the first time in my life, my father smiled at me. Not a polite smile, not a cold one. Just a human. Driving home, I realized that forgiveness isn't something you give once. It's something you choose every day, even when it hurts, even when no one asks for it. Because forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself from the story they trapped you in. Months passed. Mom recovered slowly. Dad sold the old house and moved to a smaller place near the coast. We still talk sometimes, not about the past, but about small things, weather, books, silence. Served her probation quietly, then moved away. Last I heard, she was volunteering at a rehab program for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. Maybe guilt changes people. Maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure I'll ever know. As for me, I used what was left of the trust fund to launch something new, a small nonprofit called Second Chance Grant. We help young women who've been disinherited, manipulated, or cut off from family money rebuild their lives. It's not glamorous, but every time I see one of our recipients move into her first apartment or start her own business, I feel something I never felt growing up: pride. Not the kind that comes from being chosen, the kind that comes from choosing yourself. One day, while cleaning out old boxes, I found a photograph. It was from a family vacation at the lake house, the summer before everything started falling apart. And I were sitting on the dock, feet in the water, laughing at something Mom was saying. Dad was behind the camera. We looked happy. Maybe we were in that moment. I didn't throw the picture away. I kept it. Not because it was true, but because it was part of the truth. Sometimes the lies we lived still hold a piece of the love that was real. I visit Grandma's grave every month. I bring gardenias, her favorite, and sit with her for a while. The last time I told her everything. About Dad, about starting the foundation. I could almost hear her voice in the wind. You turn pain into purpose, sweetheart. That's what survivors do. I smiled, because maybe that's what this whole story was about. Not revenge, not justice, but survival. The scars are still there. The nightmares still come sometimes, flashes of shouting, of papers, of my own name written in someone else's handwriting. But now I know who I am. Not the other daughter, not the mistake, just Lily, whole, flawed, free. And if I could speak to that scared 18-year-old girl who thought love meant silence, I'd tell her this. You don't owe anyone your quiet. The truth will hurt, but it will also heal. And sometimes, the family you lose makes room for the one you build yourself. What would you have done in my place? Would you have protected your sister or exposed her? Would you have walked away or fought for the truth? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because somewhere out there, another Lily is still keeping quiet. And maybe, just maybe, she needs to hear this one.